The wagon wheel cracked against a buried stone just as the first flakes of snow began to fall, and Abigail Anderson felt her entire world tilt sideways as the axle splintered with a sound like a gunshot echoing across the empty California plains. She gripped the reins tighter, her knuckles white beneath her leather gloves as the horse whinnied in protest. The November wind of 1882 had been biting all morning, but now it carried something far more menacing. Dark clouds rolled across the Sierra Nevada foothills with an urgency that made her stomach clench with fear. She had heard stories of freak storms in these mountains, how they could sweep down from the peaks without warning and bury everything in their path, but she had never imagined she would find herself caught in one. The wagon lurched to a stop, tilting dangerously to one side. Abigail climbed down carefully, her boots sinking into the hard earth as she surveyed the damage. The front axle had split clean through, and even with her limited knowledge of wagon mechanics, she knew this was not something she could repair on her own. She looked around desperately, searching for any sign of civilization in the rolling grasslands that stretched endlessly in every direction. She had left Sacramento 3 days ago, traveling to her aunt's ranch near the small mining town of Grass Valley. Her father had arranged the trip after her mother's death 6 months prior, insisting that a change of scenery would do her good. At 22, Abigail had reluctantly agreed, though she had little enthusiasm for anything anymore. The grief sat heavy in her chest, a constant companion that made even breathing feel like effort. Now, as the snow began to fall harder and the wind picked up velocity, she realized her grief might become the least of her problems. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and she could already feel the cold seeping through her wool coat. She had perhaps 2 hours of daylight left, maybe less with the storm clouds blocking the sun. Abigail returned to the wagon and retrieved her carpet bag, along with a thick blanket and what remained of her food supplies. The horse stamped nervously, sensing the approaching storm. She stroked his neck, murmuring soft reassurances she did not feel herself. Then she began to walk, leading the horse by the reins, heading in the direction she hoped would lead to shelter. The snow fell faster now, thick, wet flakes that clung to her hair and eyelashes. The wind howled across the open land, and within 30 minutes, visibility had deteriorated to almost nothing. Abigail's teeth chattered uncontrollably, and her fingers had gone numb despite her gloves. She knew she was in serious trouble. Stories of travelers freezing to death in storms like these were common, cautionary tales told around warm fires that suddenly felt very real and very close. She almost missed the fence line entirely, would have walked right past it if the horse had not stopped and refused to go further. Squinting through the driving snow, Abigail could barely make out the wooden posts stretching away into the white void. A fence meant property, which meant people, which meant possible shelter. She turned and followed the fence line, praying it would lead her somewhere safe. The ranch house materialized out of the storm like a mirage, solid and real and impossibly welcome. It was a sturdy structure of dark wood and stone, with smoke rising from the chimney. Beside it stood a large barn, its doors secured against the wind. Abigail felt tears of relief freeze on her cheeks as she stumbled forward, leading the exhausted horse toward salvation. She made it to the porch steps before her legs gave out. She caught herself on the railing, gasping for breath, her entire body shaking from cold and exhaustion. Somehow she found the strength to climb the steps and pound on the door with her fist. The door opened almost immediately, and Abigail found herself staring up at a man who seemed to fill the entire doorway. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell almost to his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a simple cotton shirt and denim pants, and the warmth radiating from the house behind him felt like heaven. "Please," Abigail managed through chattering teeth, "my wagon broke down. The storm." She did not remember much after that. Strong hands caught her as her knees buckled, and she was lifted as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She had a vague impression of warmth and light, of being set down on something soft, of blankets being wrapped around her shaking body. A cup was pressed to her lips, and she drank something hot and sweet that burned all the way down. "Your horse," she mumbled, trying to sit up. "Already taking care of him." The voice was deep and steady, with a hint of concern that cut through her confusion. "Just stay still. You are half frozen." Abigail opened her eyes fully and found herself lying on a sofa in front of a roaring fireplace. The man from the door was crouched beside her, watching her with an expression of worry mixed with relief. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw and weathered skin that spoke of years spent working outdoors. There was something solid and dependable about him, something that made her instinctively trust him despite their stranger status. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You might have, if you had not found the fence line when you did." He stood and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to reveal a wall of white. This storm came out of nowhere. Mountain weather can be unpredictable this time of year, but I have never seen one hit this fast or this hard. Abigail pushed herself up to sitting, wincing as feeling began to return to her fingers and toes in painful tingles. "My wagon is about 2 miles back, maybe 3. The axle broke. Cannot do anything about that until this storm passes." The man turned back to her, crossing his arms over his chest. "I am Xander Vaughn. This is my ranch. Abigail Anderson." She pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "I was traveling to my aunt's place near Grass Valley. She is expecting me." "Well, Miss Anderson, I am afraid you are stuck here until this weather clears. Could be a day, could be 3. Xander moved toward what she assumed was the kitchen. "Are you hungry? I have stew on the stove." "I do not want to impose." "You are not imposing, you are surviving." He disappeared around the corner, and Abigail heard the clink of dishes. "Besides, I do not get much company out here. It will be nice to have someone to talk to besides the horses." Abigail looked around the room while he was gone, taking in her surroundings properly for the first time. The house was simple but well-maintained, with solid furniture and clean floors. Books lined a shelf near the window, and a gun rack held 2 rifles above the fireplace. It was clearly the home of a man who lived alone but took pride in his space. Xander returned with 2 bowls of stew and a plate of bread. He handed her a bowl and settled into a chair across from her, his long legs stretched out toward the fire. The stew was simple but good, thick with beef and vegetables, and Abigail realized she was ravenous. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. "How long have you lived here?" Abigail asked eventually, needing to break the silence that was becoming too comfortable, too intimate for 2 strangers trapped together by circumstances. 5 years. Bought the place from a prospector who decided ranching was not for him. Xander set his empty bowl aside. "Built it up from almost nothing. Now I've got about 200 head of cattle and a dozen horses. It is a good life, if a lonely one." "No family." Something flickered in his eyes, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Not anymore. My parents died when I was young. Older brother raised me, but he moved east a few years back. What about you?" "Besides the aunt in Grass Valley, my father is in Sacramento. He runs a dry goods store." Abigail set her own bowl down, her appetite suddenly gone. "My mother passed away 6 months ago. Pneumonia." My father thought a change of scenery might help. I am sorry for your loss." The words were simple, but the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Losing a parent is hard, no matter how old you are. They fell silent again, but this time it was weighted with shared understanding. Outside, the storm raged on, the wind rattling the windows and piling snow against the walls. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and Abigail felt the last of the cold finally leaving her bones. "You should rest," Xander said eventually. "You have been through an ordeal. You can take my bed." "I will sleep out here. I cannot take your bed." "You can and you will." His tone brooked no argument. "Come on, I will show you where it is." Abigail followed him down a short hallway to a small bedroom. It was as Spartan as the rest of the house, with a simple bed, a dresser, and a washstand. But it was clean and warm, and the bed looked impossibly inviting. "There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up," Xander said from the doorway. "I will be in the main room if you need anything." "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn, for everything." "Xander, please." He nodded once and pulled the door closed behind him. Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, her whole body suddenly trembling with the realization of how close she had come to dying. If she had not found that fence line, if Xander had not been home, if he had not opened the door when he did, she would be buried in snow right now, frozen and alone. The thought made her stomach twist with delayed fear. She washed her face and hands in the basin, then stripped off her damp dress and hung it over the back of a chair near the small stove Xander must have lit while she was eating. In her shift and wrapped in a quilt from the bed, she finally lay down, her body sinking into the mattress with relief. Sleep came quickly, but it was restless, filled with dreams of endless white and biting cold. She woke several times in the night, disoriented and frightened, before remembering where she was. Each time, she could hear the storm still raging outside and the distant sound of Xander moving around in the main room. Somehow, knowing he was there made her feel safe enough to drift back to sleep. When she finally woke properly, pale light was filtering through the window. The wind had died down, though she could still hear the whisper of falling snow. She dressed quickly, finger combing her blonde hair and pinning it up as best she could without a proper mirror. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her out into the main room. Xander stood at the stove, looking surprisingly domestic with a spatula in his hand. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard her footsteps and offered a small smile. "Morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected, given the circumstances." Abigail moved to the window and peered out. Snow was still falling, though not as heavily as the day before. The world outside was buried under several feet of white, with drifts piled high against the house and barn. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that we are not going anywhere for a while." Xander brought 2 plates to the table and gestured for her to sit. "I got the livestock fed this morning, but it was slow going. Snow is up past my knees in some places." They ate breakfast together, and Abigail found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. In the daylight, she could see the small details she had missed the night before. The way his hair curled slightly at the ends, the thin scar that cut through his right eyebrow, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work and long days. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, and there was a gentleness to him that seemed at odds with his size and obvious strength. "What?" Xander asked, catching her staring. Abigail felt her cheeks flush. "Nothing. I was just thinking that I am very fortunate you were here, and that you are kind enough to help a stranger. Out here we help each other. It is not kindness, it is survival." He carried their empty plates to the wash basin. "Besides, what was I supposed to do? Leave you to freeze on my porch? Some men might have. Then they would not be men worth knowing." Xander dried his hands on a towel and turned to face her. "Look, Miss Anderson, you are stuck here until this storm passes and the road's clear enough for travel. Could be a few days, maybe longer. I want you to feel comfortable here. This is your home for as long as you need it. Stay as long as you need." The words settled over Abigail like a warm blanket, unexpected and deeply appreciated. She had been worried about being a burden, about overstaying her welcome in this stranger's house. But the sincerity in Xander's voice made it clear that he meant what he said. "Thank you," she said softly. "I promise I will try not to be too much trouble." "You are not trouble." He grabbed his coat from a peg by the door. "I need to check on the animals again and see about clearing some of this snow. Make yourself at home. There are books on the shelf if you want something to read, and help yourself to anything in the kitchen." After he left, Abigail stood in the middle of the room, feeling oddly lost. She was used to keeping busy, to having tasks and responsibilities to fill her days. Being stranded here, dependent on the hospitality of a stranger, left her feeling unmoored and uncertain. She decided to make herself useful. She washed the breakfast dishes and tidied the main room, then set about preparing something for lunch. She found dried beans and salt pork in the pantry, along with onions and herbs, and set a pot to simmer on the stove. It felt good to have something to do, some way to repay Xander's kindness even in this small way. When he came back an hour later, stamping snow from his boots and shaking it from his hair, the cabin was filled with the warm smell of cooking beans. He stopped in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You did not have to do that. I wanted to. I cannot just sit around doing nothing while you do all the work." Abigail stirred the pot, not looking at him. "Besides, I need to earn my keep somehow." "You do not need to earn anything." Xander hung up his coat and moved closer to the stove, warming his hands. "But I appreciate it. I have to admit, my cooking tends to be pretty basic." They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. The storm continued, sometimes easing to light flurries, sometimes picking up to near whiteout conditions. Xander handled the outside work, caring for the animals and keeping pathways clear. Abigail took over the cooking and housekeeping, finding comfort in the familiar domestic tasks. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. Xander told her about ranch life, about the challenges and rewards of working the land. He spoke of his plans to expand the herd, of his hopes of one day having enough success to hire help. Abigail found herself telling him things she had told no one else, about her mother's illness and death, about her complicated relationship with her distant father, about her fear that she would never feel whole again. "Grief is like that," Xander said one night, his voice quiet in the firelight. "It does not go away, not really, but it changes, becomes something you can carry instead of something that carries you. You sound like you know from experience." "I lost my parents when I was 12, house fire. My brother and I got out, but they did not." He stared into the flames, his expression distant. "For a long time I thought I would never feel normal again, but eventually the pain lessened. I learned to remember the good instead of dwelling on the loss." Abigail felt tears prick her eyes. "I am sorry. I cannot imagine losing both parents at once, especially so young. We survive what we have to survive." Xander looked at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You are stronger than you think, Abigail. The fact that you are here, that you kept going even when everything went wrong, that proves it." The use of her first name, spoken in his deep voice with such conviction, sent a flutter through her chest. She looked away, confused by the sudden warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. On the fourth day, the snow finally stopped. The sun came out, turning the white landscape into a blinding field of diamonds. Xander announced that he would ride out to check on her wagon and see if there was anything to be salvaged. "I can come with you," Abigail offered. "Snow is still too deep. It will be easier for me to go alone on horseback." Xander pulled on his heavy coat and gloves. "I should be back before dark." After he left, the house felt too quiet, too empty. Abigail tried to read, tried to keep busy with chores, but found her mind wandering constantly to Xander. She worried about him being out there alone, worried about what he might find when he reached her wagon, worried about what would happen when the roads cleared, and she had to leave. That last thought surprised her. 5 days ago, she had been a stranger here, desperate for shelter. Now, the thought of leaving filled her with an unexpected sadness. She had grown comfortable here, had found a peace she had not felt since her mother's death. And if she was honest with herself, she had also grown to care for Xander far more than was wise for someone she barely knew. He returned just as the sun was setting, his horse laden with items from her wagon. Abigail rushed to the door as he dismounted, relief flooding through her. "The wagon is unsalvageable," Xander reported, carrying her trunk and bags into the house. "The axle is split beyond repair and the weight of the snow collapsed one side, but I got all your belongings. Everything seems intact. Thank you." Abigail looked through her things, grateful to have her clothes and personal items back. At the bottom of her trunk, she found the small wooden box that held her mother's jewelry and the letters her parents had written to each other during their courtship. She clutched the box to her chest, tears threatening. "What is it?" Xander asked gently. "My mother's things. I was afraid they were lost." She set the box carefully aside and wiped her eyes. "I know they are just objects, but they are all I have left of her." Xander crouched beside her, his large hand warm on her shoulder. "They are not just objects, they are memories. They are pieces of her that you get to keep forever." Abigail turned to him, meaning to thank him, but found herself arrested by his closeness. She could see the concern in his gray eyes, could smell the clean scent of snow and leather that clung to him. Her heart began to beat faster, and she realized with startling clarity that what she felt for this man was far more than gratitude. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Xander pulled back, clearing his throat and standing abruptly. "I should take care of my horse," he said, his voice rough. "Get him rubbed down and fed." He left quickly, and Abigail sat on the floor surrounded by her belongings, her heart pounding. She pressed her fingers to her lips, shocked by how badly she had wanted him to kiss her. This was madness. She barely knew him. She was only here because of circumstances beyond her control. In a few days, she would leave and never see him again. But that night, as she lay in his bed and listened to him moving around in the main room, she knew she was lying to herself. She did know him. Maybe not the details of his entire life story, but she knew the important things. She knew he was kind and generous. She knew he was strong but gentle. She knew he listened when she talked and did not try to fix things that could not be fixed. She knew he made her feel safe and understood in a way she had never felt with anyone else. She knew she was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a strange sense of calm. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt something other than grief. She felt alive. The next morning, Xander announced that he would need to ride into town for supplies. "The roads should be passable now," he said over breakfast. "I will be gone most of the day, but I can stop by the telegraph office and send word to your aunt that you are safe." "That would be wonderful. She must be worried sick." Abigail hesitated, then added, "How much longer do you think before I can travel?" Something flickered across Xander's face, there and gone so quickly she could not read it. "Another few days, probably. Need to let the roads dry out a bit more, and you will need to arrange for transportation since your wagon is destroyed." "Of course. That makes sense." They avoided looking at each other for the rest of breakfast, and Abigail cursed herself for bringing up leaving. The ease that had developed between them over the past days felt suddenly strained and awkward. After Xander left for town, Abigail threw herself into work. She scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, reorganized the pantry. Anything to keep her hands and mind busy. But no matter how hard she worked, she could not stop thinking about Xander, about the way he smiled when he found something genuinely funny, about the gentle way he handled the animals, about the sound of his voice in the darkness when they talked late into the night. She was being foolish. She knew that. He had given her shelter because it was the right thing to do, not because he had any special feelings for her. And even if he did, what future could they possibly have? She was city-bred, used to a certain level of comfort and society. He was a rancher, living a hard and isolated life. They were from different worlds, but her heart did not care about logic or practicality. Her heart only knew that when Xander walked through the door that evening, snow dusting his dark hair and a smile on his face as he called out her name, she felt more at home than she had anywhere else in her entire life. "I got your message sent," Xander said, setting packages on the table. "And I picked up a few things: flour, sugar, coffee. Oh, and this." He pulled out a small wrapped package and handed it to her, suddenly looking uncertain. "I saw it in the general store and thought of you." Abigail unwrapped the package with trembling fingers. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with creamy blank pages. Her breath caught. "You mentioned that your mother used to keep a journal," Xander said, watching her reaction carefully. "I thought maybe you might like to do the same. As a way to remember these days or work through things or whatever you want." "Xander, this is too much." "It is a journal. It is not too much." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Besides, I wanted to." Abigail looked up at him, and the words spilled out before she could stop them. "Why are you being so kind to me?" The question hung in the air between them. Xander stared at her for a long moment, something intense and unreadable in his expression. Then he crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides and cupped her face in his rough, gentle hands. "Because from the moment you stumbled onto my porch half frozen and desperate, something in my chest recognized something in yours," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Because every time you smile, it feels like the sun coming out. Because when I woke up this morning, my first thought was how much I wanted to see your face. Because I am falling in love with you, Abigail, and I do not have the first idea what to do about it." Abigail's heart stuttered to a stop, then started again at double speed. "You are terrified." A small, self-deprecating smile tugged at his lips. "You are supposed to leave in a few days, go to your aunt's place, start your new life. And I am supposed to let you go because that is the right thing to do, but God help me, I do not want to." "Then do not." The words came out as barely more than a whisper. "Let me stay." "Abigail, you do not know what you are saying. This life, this place, it is not what you are used to. It is hard and lonely and sometimes brutal. You deserve more than that." "I deserve to be happy." She reached up and covered his hands with hers. "And you make me happy, Xander. Happier than I have been in longer than I can remember. I do not care about how hard the life is. I do not care that this is not what I am used to. I only care that I feel more myself with you than I have anywhere else." "You are sure?" His gray eyes searched her face desperately. "Because if we do this, if we take this step, I need to know you are sure. I could not bear to watch you leave later." In answer, Abigail rose on her toes and kissed him. His lips were warm and slightly chapped, and he tasted like coffee and something uniquely him. For a heartbeat, he froze in surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he deepened the kiss with a hunger that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "Stay." he whispered. "Not just until the road's clear. Stay as long as you need. Stay forever if you want." "Forever sounds perfect," Abigail replied and kissed him again. That night they sat by the fire wrapped in each other's arms, making plans and dreaming out loud. Xander told her about his hopes for the ranch, about the house addition he wanted to build come spring. Abigail told him about her love of gardening, about her dream of having a vegetable patch and maybe some chickens. They talked until the fire burned down to embers, and the moon rose high outside the window, neither wanting the night to end. The next few days passed in a blur of happiness. Abigail officially sent word to her aunt that she would not be coming, that she had found somewhere else to stay. She wrote to her father as well, explaining the situation as best she could in a letter, knowing that a real conversation would have to wait. Xander took her around the ranch, showing her every corner of his small empire. He taught her how to feed the horses, how to check cattle for signs of illness, how to mend a fence. Abigail proved to be a quick learner, and she loved working beside him, loved the way he patiently explained things and praised her efforts. In the evenings, they cooked together, learning each other's rhythms in the small kitchen. They read books by the fire, taking turns reading aloud to each other. They talked about everything and nothing, building the foundation of understanding that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead, and they kissed. Sweet, tender kisses that made Abigail's heart race. Deep, passionate kisses that left them both shaking with desire. Xander was always respectful, always careful not to push for more than she was ready to give. But Abigail could feel the restraint costing him, could see the hunger in his eyes when he pulled away. 2 weeks after the storm that had brought them together, Xander rode into town and returned with the circuit preacher. He had not asked Abigail first, had not discussed it with her at all. But when he dismounted and helped the reverend down from his horse, Abigail knew immediately what he intended. "Marry me," Xander said, standing in the snow outside his ranch house holding both her hands in his. "I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Abigail Anderson. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Marry me." Abigail laughed through the tears streaming down her face. "You are supposed to ask before you bring the preacher. I know. But I was afraid you might say no, and I figured it would be harder to refuse if the reverend was already here." A grin tugged at his lips. "So what do you say? Will you marry me?" "Yes." She threw her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married that afternoon in the simple ranch house, with only the preacher and his wife as witnesses. Abigail wore her best dress, the deep blue one she had packed for her arrival at her aunt's. Xander wore a clean shirt and string tie, his dark hair still damp from washing. When he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands trembled slightly, and Abigail felt her heart swell with love for this strong, gentle man who had saved her life and captured her heart. That night, Xander carried her across the threshold of the bedroom, and they came together with a desperate tenderness that left them both breathless and tearful. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Abigail finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a place, but a person. This man who held her close and whispered promises against her hair. This man who had offered shelter from a storm and ended up offering shelter for her heart. The winter passed slowly, the snow melting gradually as the days grew longer. Abigail threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm, learning everything she could. She discovered a natural talent for handling the horses, and Xander delighted in teaching her to ride properly. By early spring, she could sit a horse as well as any ranch hand, though Xander still worried whenever she ventured out alone. In March, Abigail's father came to visit, traveling from Sacramento to meet his new son-in-law. Abigail had been nervous about the visit, worried that her father would disapprove of her hasty marriage to a man he had never met. But John Anderson took one look at the way Xander and Abigail moved around each other, the unconscious touches and shared smiles, and seemed satisfied that his daughter had chosen well. "Your mother would have liked him," John said to Abigail on his last evening there, watching Xander tend to the evening chores. "She always said the best marriages were the ones built on friendship as much as love." "I miss her every day," Abigail admitted, "but being here with Xander has helped. He understands grief in a way most people do not. Then he is the right man for you." Her father squeezed her hand. "I am happy for you, daughter, truly happy." After her father left, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Spring brought new calves and long days of hard work. Xander hired 2 ranch hands to help with the workload, young men from Grass Valley who were eager to learn the trade. Abigail started her vegetable garden, spending hours on her knees in the dirt, coaxing life from the soil. She got her chickens too, a small flock that provided eggs and entertainment in equal measure. In early summer, Abigail realized she had not had her monthly courses in nearly 2 months. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx it. But when another week passed and she woke one morning feeling distinctly nauseous, she knew. She waited until evening to tell Xander, wanting the moment to be perfect. She fixed his favorite dinner, beef stew with fresh bread from her own recipe. When they sat down to eat, she watched him across the table, memorizing the moment. "What?" Xander asked, noticing her stare. "Do I have something on my face?" "No," Abigail smiled, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I was just thinking about how much I love you. I love you too." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Every single day I love you more. Even when I am tired and sick and my belly is swollen." Xander froze, his eyes widening. "Abigail, are you saying what I think you are saying? I am having a baby." The words came out in a rush, and suddenly she was crying, laughing, both at once. "We are going to have a baby, Xander." He was around the table in an instant, lifting her into his arms and spinning her around despite her protests. When he finally set her down, there were tears streaming down his face too. "I am going to be a father," he said, wonder evident in his voice. "We are going to be parents." That night, they lay in bed with Xander's hand spread protectively over her still flat stomach, making plans and choosing names. They talked until the early hours of the morning, too excited and overwhelmed to sleep. The pregnancy was not easy. Abigail was sick for months, barely able to keep anything down. Xander worried constantly, hovering over her until she had to shoo him away. But gradually, the sickness passed, and her belly began to swell with their child. Xander treated her like precious glass, refusing to let her do any heavy work and constantly checking that she was comfortable. "I am pregnant, not dying," Abigail complained one afternoon when Xander insisted on carrying a basket of laundry for her. "I know, but you are carrying my child. That makes you the most important person in the world to me." He set the basket down and pulled her close, careful of her belly. "I could not bear it if something happened to you." "Nothing is going to happen to me." She reached up and stroked his face. "I am strong and healthy, and I have you to take care of me. Everything is going to be fine." In February, as a light snow fell outside, Abigail went into labor. Xander sent one of the ranch hands racing to town for the midwife while he stayed by her side, holding her hand through each contraction. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. By the time the baby finally arrived, both Abigail and Xander were exhausted. But when the midwife placed the squalling infant in Abigail's arms, All the pain and fear melted away. Their son was perfect, with a shock of dark hair like his father and delicate features that would surely mature into handsomeness. He quieted immediately when Abigail held him, his tiny fist wrapping around her finger with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Xander asked, his voice choked with emotion as he stared at his son. "Matthew," Abigail said immediately. The name had come to her during the long night, feeling right in a way she could not explain. "Matthew John, after my father. Matthew John Vaughn." Xander tested the name, then smiled. "It is perfect. He is perfect." Parenthood changed them both in ways they had not expected. Xander, so strong and capable with the ranch, was nervous and uncertain with his tiny son. But he learned quickly, taking to late-night feedings and diaper changes with determination. Abigail discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, finding that she could function on little sleep and still manage the household and help with the ranch work. Matthew was a good baby, happy and curious about the world around him. He loved being outside, and as soon as he could sit up, Xander would take him out to see the horses and cattle. The boy seemed to have inherited his father's affinity for animals, showing no fear even of the largest horses. The years passed quickly, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythm of ranch life. Matthew grew into a sturdy, active boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's blonde hair. When he was 3, Abigail became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth after Abigail's mother. Elizabeth was different from her brother, quieter and more thoughtful. She preferred staying inside with her mother, helping with the cooking and the garden. But she adored her big brother, following him everywhere he went and crying when he left her behind. The ranch prospered under Xander's careful management. Each year, the herd grew larger, and their reputation for quality cattle spread throughout the region. They built an addition onto the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Xander hired more hands, building a small bunkhouse for them behind the barn. But despite their success and growing family, Abigail and Xander never lost sight of what was most important. Every evening, after the children were in bed, they sat together by the fire just as they had in those early days after the storm. They talked about their days, their dreams, their worries. They held hands and stole kisses like newlyweds. They remembered to tell each other "I love you" every single day. When Matthew turned 7 and Elizabeth was 4, Abigail found herself pregnant for a 3rd time. She was older now, 31, and the pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. She tired easily and felt unwell much of the time. Xander wanted her to rest, to let him hire someone to help with the house and children, but Abigail refused. "I am fine," she insisted, though in truth she was worried. Something felt different about this pregnancy, though she could not put her finger on exactly what. Her instincts proved correct when she went into labor a month early. The midwife was summoned urgently, and Abigail's labor progressed rapidly. But when the baby arrived, small and struggling to breathe, everyone's hearts stopped. The midwife worked quickly, clearing the tiny girl's airways and rubbing her chest vigorously. For several agonizing moments, the only sound was Xander's rough breathing and Abigail's whispered prayers. Then, finally, a thin wail filled the room, and the baby girl began to cry. "She is small but strong," the midwife said, wrapping the infant carefully and placing her in Abigail's arms. "Keep her warm and fed and she should be fine." They named her Catherine, and true to the midwife's words, she proved to be a fighter. Despite her small size, she had a lusty appetite and strong lungs. Within a few weeks, she had put on weight and lost the frightening fragility of those first days. With 3 children, life became even more hectic. The house was filled with noise and laughter, with muddy footprints and toys scattered everywhere. Abigail sometimes felt overwhelmed, but Xander was always there to help, taking children outside when she needed quiet or handling nighttime wakings when she was exhausted. "I could not do this without you," Abigail told him one night, watching him rock baby Catherine while simultaneously helping Elizabeth with her primer. "You would not have to." Xander looked up at her with so much love it made her breath catch. "We are partners in this, in everything. Always have been, always will be." The children grew, each developing their own personality and interests. Matthew proved to be a natural rancher, following his father everywhere and soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Elizabeth inherited her mother's love of growing things, spending hours in the garden and developing an encyclopedic knowledge of herbs and vegetables. Catherine, as she got older, showed an artistic streak, constantly drawing pictures of the ranch and the animals. By the time Matthew was 15, he was doing the work of a full ranch hand. He was tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence and gentle way with animals. Xander began teaching him the business side of ranching, knowing that someday the ranch would be his. Elizabeth, at 12, announced that she wanted to be a teacher. She had always loved reading and learning, and the idea of passing that love on to others appealed to her. Abigail was supportive, though it meant Elizabeth would need to go to Sacramento for training. The thought of her daughter leaving, even for a good cause, made Abigail's heart ache. Catherine, at 8, was still figuring out her path. But she had inherited her father's determination and her mother's compassion, and Abigail knew that whatever she chose to do, she would do it well. One evening in late summer, when the children were all in bed and the house was finally quiet, Xander led Abigail outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They walked hand in hand to the rise behind the house, where they could look out over the ranch that had become their life. "You ever regret it?" Xander asked suddenly. "Staying here, I mean. Giving up the life you could have had in the city." Abigail looked at him, surprised. In all their years together, he had never asked that question. Never, not even once. Really, not even when things were hard, when money was tight, when the children were small and demanding, not even then. She squeezed his hand. "Xander, you gave me everything I ever wanted, even things I did not know I wanted. A home, a purpose, a family, love." She reached up and touched his face. "You saved my life that day you found me half frozen on your porch, but more than that, you gave me a reason to live it." Xander pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and resting his chin on top of her head. They stood like that for a long time, watching the sun sink below the horizon and the first stars begin to appear. "I love you," he said finally. "More now than even that first day, though I did not think that was possible. I love you too." Abigail turned in his arms and kissed him, soft and sweet. "Thank you for asking me to stay. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for saying yes." They stood together under the emerging stars. Two people who had found each other in the middle of a blizzard and built something beautiful from chance and circumstance. The ranch spread out below them, solid and real, a testament to hard work and determination. But more important than the land or the cattle or the house was what they had built together. A family, a partnership, a love that had weathered every storm and only grown stronger. The years continued to pass. Matthew took over more and more of the ranch management, proving himself a worthy successor to his father. Elizabeth went to Sacramento for teacher training and returned to take a position at the small school in Grass Valley. Catherine discovered a talent for music and spent hours at the piano Xander had surprised Abigail with on their 10th anniversary. At 19, Matthew fell in love with Sarah Miller, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Xander and Abigail hosted the wedding at the ranch, and Abigail cried as she watched her son pledge his life to another. Within a year, Matthew and Sarah presented them with their first grandchild, a boy they named Xander. Elizabeth married a fellow teacher, a kind man named Robert who shared her love of learning. They settled in Grass Valley, close enough to visit often. Catherine, at 16, was being courted by the son of the town banker, though she insisted she was in no hurry to marry. On a cold November day, 23 years after the blizzard that had brought them together, Xander woke early and slipped out of bed without waking Abigail. He dressed quietly and went outside, standing on the porch and watching the sun rise over the ranch. He heard the door open behind him and smiled as Abigail joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. "Could not sleep?" she asked, leaning against him, just thinking. He put his arm around her. "It is 23 years today since that storm. 23 years since you stumbled onto this porch half frozen and scared. Best day of my life." Abigail looked up at him, even though I did not know it at the time. "Mine too." Xander kissed the top of her head. "I keep thinking about how different my life would be if that storm had not happened, if your wagon had not broken down, if you had not found my fence line. We would have found each other somehow." Abigail spoke with conviction. "I have to believe that. Some things are just meant to be." "You really think so?" "I know so." She turned in his arms to face him. "We were meant to find each other, Xander. We were meant to build this life together. Every moment, good and bad, has led us here, and I would not change a single thing." Xander looked down at his wife, at the lines that time had carved around her eyes and mouth, at the silver threading through her blonde hair, at the hands worn from years of work. She was even more beautiful to him now than she had been at 22, because now her beauty was layered with history and memory and shared experience. "I love you, Abigail Vaughn," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you too." She stood on her toes and kissed him, and it was like the first kiss and the 1,000th kiss all at once. "Thank you for asking me to stay. Thank you for staying." They stood together on the porch as the sun climbed higher, warming the cold air. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of the ranch waking up, horses whinnying for their breakfast, cattle lowing in the distance, the ranch hands beginning their day. Inside the house, they would soon hear the sounds of their daughter waking, starting her own day. It was an ordinary morning on an ordinary day, but it was also extraordinary in its ordinariness. This was the life they had built together, born from a chance meeting during a blizzard. This was the love that had sustained them through hard times and celebrated with them in good times. As they turned to go back inside, Abigail paused and looked around the ranch one more time. She thought about the frightened, grieving young woman who had arrived here so long ago, lost and desperate for shelter. That woman felt like someone from another life, someone she barely recognized. The woman she had become was stronger, more confident, more at peace with herself and the world. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother. She was a rancher and a homemaker. She was loved, and she loved in return, deeply and completely. The blizzard had left her stranded at his ranch. The cowboy had said, "Stay as long as you need." And she had stayed, building a forever from a few desperate days. Inside the warm house, Xander started breakfast while Abigail woke Catherine. They moved around each other with the ease of long practice, anticipating needs and filling gaps without discussion. When Catherine came to the table, sleepy and tousled, Xander poured her coffee while Abigail set out plates. "Did you know it has been 23 years today since the storm that brought your mother to me?" Xander asked his daughter. "Really?" Catherine perked up. "Tell the story again." Abigail laughed. You have heard it 100 times, I know, but I like hearing it. Catherine wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. It is so romantic, like something from a novel. So Xander told the story again, about the blizzard and the broken wagon, about a half-frozen woman on his porch, about falling in love without meaning to. Abigail added details he forgot, correcting his memory and embellishing the tale. Catherine listened with rapt attention, even though she knew every word. When the story was done, Catherine sighed happily. I want a love story like that someday. You will, Abigail assured her. When the time is right, you will find someone who makes your heart sing the way your father makes mine sing. Later that morning, Matthew arrived with his family. Sarah carried little Xander, who at 2 was a bundle of energy and mischief. Elizabeth and Robert came from town, bringing fresh bread from the bakery. They gathered around the big table that Xander had built years ago, specifically for family dinners like this. As Abigail looked around at her family, at the faces she loved more than life itself, she felt her heart swell with gratitude. This was what mattered, not the size of the ranch or the success they had achieved. This: family, love, connection. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the children were playing outside, Xander pulled Abigail aside. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. Xander, you did not need to get me anything. I wanted to. He opened his palm, revealing a beautiful silver locket. I had it engraved. Abigail took the locket with trembling fingers and opened it. Inside was a picture of them on their wedding day, young and hopeful. On the opposite side was engraved, stay as long as you need. Forever is not long enough. Tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks. It is perfect. Xander fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers gentle on her skin. You are perfect. Our life is perfect. I just wanted you to have something to remember that. As if I could ever forget. Abigail turned and wrapped her arms around him. Every day with you is a gift, Xander. Every single day. They held each other in the kitchen of the house they had made into a home, listening to the sounds of their family around them. Through the window, they could see their grandchildren playing in the yard, their laughter carried on the wind. Beyond them, the ranch stretched out under the blue sky, beautiful and enduring. 23 years ago, Abigail had arrived here desperate and afraid, seeking only shelter from a storm. What she had found was so much more. She had found love and purpose and belonging. She had found a place where her roots could grow deep and strong. She had found home, and Xander, who had offered shelter to a stranger without hesitation, had found his heart's companion. He had found someone to share his dreams and his burdens. He had found someone who saw him, truly saw him, and loved what she saw. He had found home too. As the sun began to set on that anniversary day, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Xander and Abigail walked hand in hand to their favorite spot on the rise behind the house. It had become their tradition, this quiet moment together at the end of the day. What are you thinking about? Abigail asked, noticing the contemplative look on Xander's face. Just that life is strange. He pulled her close. How one moment, one decision can change everything. If I had not been home that day, if I had not heard you knocking, if I had not opened the door. But you did. Abigail rested her head on his shoulder. You opened the door and you invited me in and you gave me a place to stay. And I stayed, not just as long as I needed, but forever. Forever is not long enough, Xander echoed the words from the locket. I want 1,000 forevers with you. Then that is what we will have. Abigail looked up at him, her eyes shining with love. However many days we are given, we will fill them with love and laughter and family. We will fill them with each other. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, they turned back toward the house. Light spilled from the windows, warm and welcoming. Inside, their family waited. their children and grandchildren, their legacy and their joy. They had built something remarkable from nothing. Not just a successful ranch, though they had done that. Not just a family, though that was their greatest achievement. They had built a love that transcended circumstances and survived challenges. They had built something that would endure long after they were gone, in the memories of their children and the stories they would tell their own children someday. The blizzard that had brought them together was long past, a distant memory of a different time. But the love born in those desperate days had only grown stronger with each passing year. It had weathered its own storms, financial difficulties and personal losses, and all the small challenges that life brings. And it had emerged not just intact but more beautiful for having survived. As they reached the porch, Xander paused and turned to Abigail one more time. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For trusting me when you had no reason to, for staying when you could have left, for building this life with me, for loving me." His voice caught. "For everything." Abigail cupped his face in her hands. "Thank you for saving me, not just from the storm, but from the darkness I was living in. Thank you for showing me that life could be beautiful again. Thank you for loving me." They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, the ranch was settling in for the night. The cattle were bedded down. The horses were in the barn. The ranch hands were in their bunkhouse. And inside the house their family waited. This was their legacy. Not just land and livestock, but love. Love that had started with a stranger's kindness and grown into something that would last generations. Love that had transformed two broken people into something whole and strong and enduring. As they walked through the door together, Abigail looked back one more time at the land that had become her home. She thought about that terrified young woman who had stumbled through a blizzard so long ago. She wished she could tell that woman not to be afraid. That the cowboy who opened the door would become her whole world. That the temporary shelter would become permanent belonging. That the desperate stay would become a lifetime of love. But then again, maybe that young woman had known, on some deep level, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Maybe when Xander had said, "Stay as long as you need," her heart had recognized the invitation for what it really was. Not just shelter from a storm, but an invitation to forever. And she had accepted. Every day for 23 years, she had accepted that invitation. And she would continue accepting it every day for however many days they had left. Because some loves are worth staying for. Some homes are worth putting down roots in. Some cowboys are worth loving for a lifetime. Inside the warm house, surrounded by family and laughter and love, Abigail caught Xander's eye across the room. He smiled at her, that special smile reserved just for her, and her heart sang the way it always did when he looked at her like that. The blizzard had left her stranded at his ranch. The cowboy had said, "Stay as long as you need." And she had found, in that unexpected place with that unexpected man, everything her heart had been searching for. She had found home. She had found love. She had found her forever. And it was more beautiful than she ever could have imagined.